They say the loudest voices in a room get the biggest meeting invites. But what if the quietest voice holds the map to a kingdom everyone's been circling? Picture one decision. You either walk past the solution because of the messenger, or you change the world by listening. The conference hall smelled of coffee and new carpet. Big screens flashed "Innovate Agriculture" in slick sans serif. The founder, tall, composed, a titan in the supply chain playbook, took the stage like every room was a runway. He'd built an empire on acquisitions, KPIs, and polished PowerPoints. His process was efficient. Invite a crowd of polished consultants, white-collar geniuses, and show them the slide where growth looked inevitable. He loved ideas that sounded like bullet points. Scalable, scalable, scalable. He loved them so much he let his circle of advisors speak first. Conveniently, they were versions of each other in different suits. Out beyond the glass and the buzz, in a town stitched together by red dirt and stubborn hedgerows, lived Elijah. He was a farmer in the old sense. Hands mapped by seasons, silence as fluent as the language of soil. His family had a recipe, not a spreadsheet. A secret cultivation method handed down like a prayer. A blend of ash, fermented plant tea, and timing that made fields sing even when the rains forgot to come. It wasn't patented because patents felt foreign and expensive. It was a covenant. He'd kept it because it fed people, and because his ancestors said some things were sacred until they weren't safe to hoard. When the company announced a contest, Fix the Region's Soil Crisis, a modest reward for the best actionable solution, Elijah didn't think of profit. He thought about soil that remembers how to give. He walked into the glass tower in boots, still holding a fleck of his land, hat in hand. The lobby's music played a polished optimism. The room where pitches happened smelled like new money. "You got 5 minutes." The founder leaned forward the way rich men lean when they're imagining markets. The white men in the front rows nodded at each other like a board approving its own reflection. When Elijah began, his voice had the calm of someone who'd known droughts and still believed in seasons. He described something simple and old, a 2-step fermentation to revive microbial life, timed with lunar cycles and a touch of charcoal. He described something that cost a fraction of commercial fertilizers and could be replicated by hand. He spoke with the authority of lived practice. Then the founder smiled, a professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "Interesting," he said, the kind of interesting that precedes dismissal in a polished voice. One of the advisors, polite, blank, paid to sound creative, chimed in, "We appreciate grassroots ingenuity, but we scale patents, not folklore. We need models, projections, IP protection." The founder laughed, smooth as oil. "We don't expect anything from a smallholder," he said, the words sliding into the room like a chill. Not loud, but everyone heard the undertone. This was not the kind of story they valued. There was a hiss of embarrassed silence, a camera snapping a photo that would later be used in a quarterly newsletter to demonstrate diverse outreach. Elijah didn't argue. He didn't shout. He walked out. He went home, down on the walk back to his land. The old formula felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because it had been dismissed in a room that traded in valuations. Light because it had kept communities alive for generations. He could have sold it to one of those consultants for a quick buyout, but somewhere between his father's voice and the way the crops responded last summer, he made a decision. He would put it into the world on his own terms. He started small. Pamphlets at the farmer's market, a hand-painted sign on the lane, demonstrations where people could touch the soil and taste the difference. He trademarked the name, not to hide it, but to protect it from being twisted into something the market could strip of context and credit. He registered the process so communities could replicate it without predatory licensing. He learned the language of contracts the hard way, staying up nights, turning legalese into plain truth. He packaged seedlings, taught neighbors, filmed little clips of soil turning from tired and gray to rich and black. He called the method root return, something with breath in its name. Word spread because the soil spoke for him. Crops grew where there had been only scrub. Rainfall wasn't enough, but the earth began to remember how to hold it. Farmers who had been skeptical at first started bringing their neighbors. A small cooperative in a neighboring district began using Elijah's process and doubled yields in a season. A local journalist did a human interest piece, not glossy, but honest, and then a young agronomist with a podcast visited and amplified the story. The internet, absurd and democratic, did what the conference room had failed to do. It turned proof into momentum. Offers started coming in. At first, they were cautious, distributors wanting to stock his kits, cooperatives wanting to license the process. Elijah kept his structure lean. He had always wanted to help people, not to hand their livelihoods over to middlemen. Then a firm with a glossy acquisition department made the kind of offer that would secure generations of family land. He took meetings. He did due diligence. He built a company structure that honored the farmer's autonomy while allowing scale without capture. Then he became a brand. Root Return was on the radio. NGOs wanted a partner. Universities wanted to study it. A model farmer from a formerly barren valley gave Elijah a medal at a ceremony where the governor used the word innovation like a trophy. He hired a small team from his own town, trained them, made sure the contracts he wrote protected community rights. Money, when it arrived, did not change everything. It amplified his ability to teach, to buy land for a shared training center, to fund microloans for women farmers. The formula that had been a private blessing became a public infrastructure. Word inevitably gets back to the top. The founder, who had once laughed and called the idea improbable, watched Root Return's growth like a CEO watching a market he'd ignored now become a category leader. His analysts did the math. The product had adoption curves, market penetration, PR synergy, and profit vectors. The same company that had missed the meeting prepared an acquisition playbook. They called it an unrejectable offer in the boardroom, a classic hostile courtship masked as strategic partnership. He arranged a public meeting. There was PR theater, cameras, a panel. The founder rehearsed lines about corporate responsibility and scaling up solutions for humanity. Elijah walked into the room, carrying nothing but a small jar of the fermented mix and the calm people mistake for simplicity. The founder arrived with a briefcase that had room for numbers and apologies not yet made. He opened with an offer that had the kind of zeros that rearrange childhoods. "Name your price," he said. A few in the audience clapped reflexively, conditioned by spectacle. Others watched, the way you watch a balloon you once punctured, waiting to see if air returns. Elijah listened. He had been offered hard currency before, a figure that would put his grandchildren through anything they wanted. But the question the founder couldn't compute was not about money. It was about dignity and trust. He said quietly, "This isn't a product to be parceled to the highest bidder." The founder smiled. "We can scale your reach globally. We can protect communities, guarantee supply chains." Think of the ROI. He pivoted into corporate dialect, trying to convert ethics into spreadsheets. The room hummed with the sound of numbers being stacked like a defense. Then Elijah told the story he had held back. He said, "In that same room where you offered money to whoever writes the flashiest slide, you dismissed me with a word I still hear. You told me not to expect anything from a poor farmer. Do you remember? You threw away our work with the same breath you used to negotiate its price. You told a room of people that my hands were unworthy of their attention." The founder registered this like a stain. He opened his mouth, the line between apology and argument blurring. But Elijah continued, "My ancestors gave me this not because they wanted a new symbol of profit, but because, in times of drought and debt, we survived. You asked for solutions, and we came with one. You did not listen when we offered it freely. Now you want to buy the courage you refused to respect." Silence collected like dust. The founder, used to buying options and reputations, found a currency that didn't have a buyout clause. Voices in the room shifted from PR to human. A few company lawyers fidgeted, spreadsheets humming on their laptops like insects. A consultant tried to steer the conversation back to terms and conditions, but his voice had the thinness of someone who has never been completely responsible for consequences. Then Elijah did something fewer CEOs do in the glare of public theater. He named a condition. He said, "If you want this solution in your supply chain, it will not be sold as mine to be repackaged. It will come with terms that protect farmers' rights, require community training, enforce royalty structures that go back to the people it came from. We will not be reduced to a line item in your Q4. We will be partners, not subsidiaries. The founder's brow tightened. His deal flow had not accounted for such human variables. He tried to bargain. The same white man who said, "What can I expect from a black beggar?" was now bargaining like a beggar in front of that man. He offered more money, retrofitted PR commitments, even a seat on his philanthropic board. Each offer was met with the same calm refusal. Elijah's terms were not about the next quarter. They were about futures. Then Elijah turned to the founder, the room, and said something quiet and cutting enough that it landed like a verdict. "You taught me what to expect when you mocked me, that some men's work is invisible until it's profitable. I built something from a culture you called insignificant. I will not sell my ancestors' labor to the man who taught a room to laugh at it. Respect is not for sale." It was more than a rebuke. It was a lesson. The founder, who could have smiled his way out of a scandal, felt a shame that didn't come from a PR manager's checklist. It wasn't a temporary embarrassment. It was the deep, aligning kind of shame that cracks open assumptions. He saw, in a ripple across faces, not just the cost of a lost market, but the cost of a moral ledger he hadn't bothered to balance. People in the room stood. Some clapped, not for the money, but for the principle. The founder, carefully composed, left the stage with his briefcase a little lighter and a pride a little heavier. Backstage, he rewound his memory to the day he laughed and found it smaller, shriller, and uncharacteristic. In the following weeks, op-eds quoted Elijah. NGOs used his model. Other companies, smaller, hungrier, and less arrogant, reached out with genuine partnerships. The founder issued a statement about learning, which read like a quarterly report on conscience. It made headlines. It didn't undo the lesson. Elijah went home to fields that listened better than any boardroom ever could. He had millions, but the metric that mattered to him was not a KPI. It was whether the next generation could say they'd been taught to steward the land rather than strip it. He invested in training centers, in scholarships, and in legally binding cooperative agreements that meant the next pitch didn't have to beg for attention. His company continued to grow, but it grew with guardrails that matched his ancestors' ethics. The moral wasn't simply that the underdog won. The moral was that systems built on habit and privilege can miss the solutions that live outside their own echo chambers. And that sometimes, when you're mocked for being small, the best response is to be better, not bitter, to build structures that make dignity non-negotiable. People still tell the story because it's simple and true. A man who had been offered nothing was offered everything. He refused to sell his name cheap. He taught a room full of people how expensive integrity really is. And the founder? He had to return to his boardroom and reconcile the ledger between profit and honor, which is harder than any acquisition model he'd ever built.